Hello there and welcome to the Drax Files Radio Hour. My name is Draxer Dupree. I'm here with Joe Yardley. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hello. I'm fine. Thank you.
And we've seen the top story. Syrian refugees in Canada are housed in the same hotel that houses a furry convention. I mean, this is the best story I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's a wonderful story. And I know I'm the first to admit that I don't always understand furries. And everyone should do whatever they want. I'm not going to judge them. But I never quite understood it. But seeing a story like that, you think, this is fantastic. And you see those kids reacting. I mean, there's a few videos online and they're really touching. And you think, yeah, fantastic. Well done, guys.
I do have a furry story lined up actually for the Drax Files, but that was scheduled for September. I think I'm going to fly to Canada right now. I mean, this has nothing to do with Second Life, but furries nonetheless. But today on the show, two graduate students at UCLA, researchers at the Linden Memory Lab there, studying cognitive neuroscience, and they're experimenting with VR and OpenSim. They're finding out the neural correlations of enhanced mnemonic retrieval. Are you still with me, Joe?
Yeah. I mean, are you still with me? You seem to have more trouble with those words than I had.
Those are big words.
Those are big words.
Fascinating topic, and Joey Esoe and Nico Regente, what they do among other things, they use OpenSim to construct virtual environments to enhance memory capabilities, because the information that needs to be stored is presented in a spatial context in a virtual world, and we'll talk about the method of loci. I didn't know what that was, but it's thousands years old method of remembering things. So it's awesome. And you know what, Joe? We always, make fun of OpenSim, but finally there's a use case for it.
Nah, I'm not making fun of OpenSim. I think it's a pretty brilliant system. It's just not very busy.
We kid. So all that's coming up, and of course, Ebbe Altberg spilling a whole bag of beans at the Virtual World's Best Practices of Education, which is going on right now until the 12th of this month. And Ebbe was talking about the recent bans that were happening. He was talking about Sansa, a whole bunch of new information. Let me get the housekeeping notes out of the way. You can get in touch with us, ping the show's avatar Drax Files anytime with news and press releases or whatever you want. Radio at draxfiles.com. Skype, you can leave a voicemail. Become a sponsor with us if you have a business. You have your own banner displayed on the website, mentioned every single show. We have lots of great sponsors, including Dutchy Furniture. Seems to be a Dutch business, I suppose.
Yes, very, very Dutch.
A very frugal business. And I actually spoke to a Frauke from Dutchy yesterday.
What's her name?
Frauke. I'm afraid to pronounce her last name. You're going to kill me. What is her last name?
Frauke Horenbeek.
Horenbeek. Okay, I got it.
Horenbeek.
Horenbeek, I got it. Dutchy makes furniture, and there's really a fair amount of realism because she's using the experience key functionality in Second Life to auto-attach props for more realism. So you have like a cooking sequence, you have cutting vegetables, then you have putting vegetables into the pot, and all these props are auto-attached through the experience keys.
It is very exciting. It's very, very funny.
So you can support this show on an individual basis by taking out a voluntary subscription. That's $100 Linden per month. It really helps us out, keeps the show going. It's $25 Linden per show. If you like this show, if you think this is a great community service, if you will, then sponsor us. Now, let's go straight to the news. So Ebbe Altberg, CEO of Linden Lab, was at an ungodly hour for us Europeans, appearing at the Virtual World's Best Practices of Education conference, and he talked a lot about and you blogged about this. He talked a lot about Sansa, but also about the bans. We talked about it last week. A lot of content creators were banned. In the case of Insilico and Star Raven SAT, we'll talk about this at the very end of this show. Her experience, Insilico vanished basically. 6 Sims, poof, gone in a very dystopian fashion.
The heart attack that will give you. You log on to Second Life and 6 of your Sims are just gone.
What did Ebbe have to say about, and we've been speculating, by the way, and I've been holding back names that are being thrown around as sort of the perpetrators who abuse the abuse report system. There's a lot of threads in Second Life universe forums. But what did Ebbe have to say about the bans?
Well, it was he was sort of suggesting in a very polite and friendly and around the corner sort of way.
Like a politician almost.
Yes, almost like a politician. He was sort of reminding us that everyone here is just hearing one side of the story. and that there are always two sides to a coin. And he said, maybe the reason they were given is not the one that they are sharing with the world. And he said, we're not having some sort of witch hunt. We didn't turn on a switch on a new sort of system.
Right. That was the speculation that we had, that there's an automated system that somehow flags content that is against the terms of service and then automatically sort of bans you if you are associated with that content either on Marketplace or in World.
Yeah, and we assumed that perhaps this system needed some fine-tuning. But what it was is that he said, now and then, I'm using his words now, the Lindens dip in and to have a look around and see what people are doing, and then they notice something that they had not noticed before, which I can sort of understand, because I remember being on Twitter sharing a Marketplace item that was promoting neo-Nazi thingies. Mm-hmm. And while I was sharing Nazi propaganda stuff, links to Marketplace on Twitter and discussing this with friends, we were actually watching them being deleted as we were talking.
Big Brother was seriously watching you.
Yeah. So it does seem like, I can understand that there's so much stuff on Marketplace, and I think that's where this all began. But also in World that the Lindens just can't always know about. And when they discover one sort of thing, they start looking for it, and then they realize there are more people selling it and more people making it. And then then it's, to us outsiders, it seems like they're suddenly doing something out of nowhere without a reason, while they're actually only just discovering these things.
But at the same time, let me just jump in here real quick. I mean, don't we deserve, or some of these content creators, I mean, again, we only hear their side of the story, but a lot of people told me they never got any explanation. And so that's really scary. If you have a business and you have, let's just say you have tens of thousands of real US dollars in game. Oh, I'm calling Second Life a game. But let's say you want to cash that out, and or you have a sim and you have running costs.
That is, of course, ridiculous. I mean, I can understand that they discover something that deserves an instant ban. I can understand that. But even when someone gets instantly banned for the most horrendous act ever, they should get some sort of explanation. They should get someone on the line who says, yeah, you've been doing this and this and that. And then they go, oh, crikey. So no communication at all. I mean, that's a no-go.
All right. Listeners, please call in with your story. Put it in audio or write us. What do you think about this? What could be an improvement in terms of communicating? It's, I think, really great that Ebbe took this opportunity to address it.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I was trying to get a statement. I understand that they can't give a statement.
Yeah, that's one of the things he also said. He said, listen, because of privacy rules and laws and I don't know what, we can't tell the world what happened. We can't tell you that person that is saying, oh, I was innocent, I didn't do anything, I got banned for no reason. We can't tell you that they're lying. We can't tell you why they got banned. We can't show you pictures of the stuff they were making and selling. So that he actually mentioned that we can't tell you what happened, but there's always two sides to a story, which is of course true. But in the cases that we know about, I'm pretty sure that indeed in some cases the Linden Lab simply did not correspond or did not communicate properly. And Ebbe also said there were a few mistakes made.
Well, they have to comply with a lot of laws, but they're also sort of judge and executioner at the same time in any kind of closed system. But like we said in the past, it's not really unusual to do it like that in the world of technology. YouTube certainly does it, and other entities do it too. And even the physical bank would do it. If you come to a bank and your overdraft sort of is maxed out, and you come in and you're hungry and you want cash. I mean, that happened to a musician friend of mine 25 years ago, and the banker, and he was practically almost homeless, and the banker told him, I'm so sorry, but I can't give you 50 cents.
When a bank does that, these days they send you a very scary letter first. If YouTube bans you or anything, or you get a warning, you also get a very long automated email that makes no sense. But it seems that at least in some cases, Linden Lab doesn't tell you anything.
That's a good point. So it's a 3-tier system. The bank sends you a letter. YouTube sends you an email that you don't understand. Linden Lab does absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and I think that definitely in a few cases that is what happened, because as much as communication has improved in the last couple of years, there is still some room for improvement. I'm sorry, Linden Lab, there is no excuse for no communication.
All right, so let's move on because we want to talk about Sansa before we go to the feature part of the program with Joey and Nico, because Mel Burns has recorded the Ebbe Altberg talk at Virtual World's Best Practice of Education. He talked a lot about Sansa, so as it stands now, they will let people in May or June.
Yeah, and he mentioned twice that they're not looking for people who just want to look around, Drax.
So who sit on a camping stool and just sit there. I understand.
Yeah. He didn't name you, but
oh, that's pretty clear. I mean, you can't hint any clearer at who is essentially me. I understand.
Yes. So they're going to open it up in May and June for everyone except Drax.
Damn, that's worse than my own son when he gets asked at school, "What does your dad do?" He says, "Well, nothing." But the cool thing is here, the information here, some other things, and people can read your blog. You kind of summarize this nicely. They can watch Mel Burns' video. There's a streaming solution for Sansa, which I find very cool. So you can
that is very exciting.
Interact on a mobile device with it.
That sounds like SL Go, which is something that I've been writing about a lot. I've been writing that I thought that Linden Lab should offer such a service. And quite a few people said they'll never do that, which is always nice to remind them of.
Other things, the Linden Dollar will not be used in Sansa. That's very interesting. I discussed this with Kent Bai from the Voices of VR podcast, and he says, Linden Lab was going to be so proprietary. They're going to force people to use the Linden Dollar, blah, blah, blah. So there you go, Kent. It's not happening.
Up to yesterday, every story we heard pretty much suggested that the Linden Lab Dollar would also be working in Sansa. So that's they've had a new meeting.
Another thing here, 360 video. Ebbe said that he experienced 360 video in Sansa. Now this I find very interesting because this is thrown around often sort of interchangeably in the mainstream press. It drives me crazy. People talk about VR and then basically they don't differentiate between 360 video, which is basically capturing a real life scene, in 360 degrees with a multiple camera array, like a GoPro array or whatever.
You're inside the film or inside the television show, or you're at the stadium while someone is kicking a ball about.
Right. So what's really interesting here is if they figured out a way, basically an enhanced version of media on a prim, if you will, that we have now, which is sort of a flat way of experiencing real-life content or web content within SL. Now, if you have a 360 video ability to play back in Sansa, I think that's very cool because that's one step further in sort of merging, quote-unquote, real life with a virtual life.
Absolutely. It is one of the things that is selling virtual reality at the moment, because that is one of the cool things you can do with one of those headsets. And if you
exactly,
can,
and it also kind of kills a little bit sort of the this meme of sort of the loner in their mom's basement, because at least you're closing yourself off with a headset, but at least you're checking out real stuff. Yeah,
we're still living in our basements though.
Here's the thing, and we talk about this all the time, and I don't know why this rumor is so persistent in the community, but if I venture a guess, it's because the community has a real anxiety disorder. Second Life community, sorry, I'm painting with a broad brush, but Second Life will remain here. It will not close when Sansa opens. Those are two separate worlds.
Yeah, for years.
Well, we don't know. That could be all sorts of things. Maybe an earthquake will hit San Francisco and all the servers are gone, but knock on wood. But specific things are maybe not in the feature list that we enjoy right now. For example, the fact that it's all sort of interconnected and we can sort of teleport from place to place. And it's sort of the closest to the metaverse that we have.
It will be a different thing. And, Second Life is probably going to stay much bigger and much active for a very long time, even after Sansa has gone public. I think that perhaps eventually people will start moving over and more people will be in Sansa than in Second Life, but that is years away. And I believe Linden Lab when they say that Second Life is going to keep going the way it is going, and even still improving for quite a few more years. And I doubt they're going to shut it down as long as it makes them money.
Another important aspect of the announcement that Ebbe, or the news that Ebbe broke basically, is that they're not developing for Mac right now. He hinted at the fact that Sansa will be available for Mac at some point, but they're not focusing on it, and that is interesting. But it's also
upsetting.
Upsetting for some Mac users, and I am a Mac user, but I got to tell
I'm one as well.
Right, but but as you know, and as is publicly known, and Paul Malaki has a point on this, that Mac has problems running high-intensity graphic applications.
They don't put much emphasis in the gaming and in high, in graphic cards. That's that's going to make their lovely thin computers bigger and faster and hotter and things like that, which is a shame.
But I was going to say what is interesting, and maybe listeners, you can comment on this. What I don't understand is that Unity, which is really the primary game development platform, and I'm certain that even though Linden Lab may not admit that in public, they are after the Unity folks to providing a platform where people can deploy games and worlds, and Unity has that market really totally. They own that market, and Unity does work on Macs. So I have no experience with Unity. I want to talk to someone who develops with Unity. Is the Mac version of Unity, is it subpar or what's the deal here? Because you can, I think 90-something% of VR apps are made with Unity right now. So there is a way of doing it.
Yeah, we'll have to go and wait and see. It is, they said they're going to develop it further along the line. And to be fair, they're still in beta testing and after, so it's still early. But as long as they don't have it, it's going to cut out quite a few people.
Anyway, we're completely out of time. I wanted to mention the fee hike in Second Life. I put some stuff on the blog. You can read about that. You are able to, Linden Lab put out a blog post. You can now cash out Linden dollars faster within 2 business days normally, and but the fee hike comes along with it. It's a 1.5% of the transaction value with a minimum fee of $3 as opposed to $1. We don't have time to get into it, maybe next time. But basically, the views are split. A lot of people say, that's very cool. I can cash out faster. Other people say, well, my hobby just got a little bit more expensive and it kind of sucks.
Now, it would have been nice if they'd given us a choice between, extra speedy cash transfer and regular transfer.
Right.
And then you pay a little bit extra if you want it quickly. Because, there's plenty of people in Second Life who don't mind waiting a few days, waiting a week.
It bears keeping in mind, though, that Linden Lab is passing on fees, and they have to in order to run a viable business. And frankly, PayPal and Skrill, the other provider that I have not used, but I'm really not a fan of PayPal. They have exorbitant fees, frankly, and so
and unfortunately, they sort of got the monopoly because there are just not that many alternatives that you can trust. So you pay what you get what you pay for.
Anyway, let's go to a little music break before we go to a feature story with Nico Regenta and Joy Esui. Oh God, I'm butchering her name. This is Choo Choo, a fabulous music duo from Japan. Longtime Second Life musicians, probably some of the best musicians I've ever heard in Second Life. This is a tune called Fjord. Enjoy the tune. Here's Choo Choo. So that was Choo Choo with a tune called Fjord. Now on to our feature story. Joey Esoi and Nico Regenter, graduate students at UCLA, neuroscience researchers at the Risman Memory Lab. And as I said earlier, they use OpenSim to put people in 3D environments and see if learning in spatial context enhances memory and how it does it. They have an fMRI scanner and they look closely at the brain images. Joey and Nico work on their own projects as well as together in various capacities. We have lots of contextual information on our blog. Let's roll tape. Joey speaks first.
We use OpenSim. There are other ways that we could do this. Like we can, for example, use Unity 3D or something like that. But it turns out that OpenSim is most user-friendly and it's more that we can have multiple people in the same environment without interfering each other, as you guys who are familiar with Second Life with know.
We need to delineate that you're actually doing different experiments. So let's start with Nico here. What are you working on?
So I've been interested what lets people have better mnemonic abilities, right? So some people can remember, really great. They have great episodic memory. They can remember long lists of items. And then other people, kind of like myself, have a little bit of trouble remembering what we had for breakfast, right? So there's some great mnemonic techniques that have been classically shown to facilitate people's memory. One such thing is the method of loci. Have you ever heard of that? Like memory palaces. The classic implementation of this technique is you close your eyes and you imagine yourself in a very familiar environment. Let's say your childhood home. You begin walking around that environment as you are instructed to remember a list of items. So then let's say I'm walking in my front door and I imagine a banana. And I take that banana and I place it on the door. And then I walk a little bit further and now I take an apple and I place it in the hallway. And you continue this so on and so forth until, let's say, you've placed 20 items around your environment, your imagined environment. And then when it comes time to remember that list of items, the retrieval technique is you just walk back through the environment and walk along the path and view all of the items and name them off as you pass them. So it really bolsters people's memory incredibly, has been doing so since like 2000 BC or something crazy like that. And so when you want to study this in the lab, there's a lot of sources of variance, right? So, your mental imagery capabilities might be stronger than mine, or you may have had, X amount, like 10 years experience in a home, and I may have 20 years experience. So there's a lot of variables that, are out of our control. However, with a platform like Second Life, it basically just virtual reality in general, we can kind of equal the playing field for everyone. So what we've done in order to study this technique is created 3 very distinct virtual environments, all with the same general landscape, but all very radically different. And we can provide you with screenshots of that later. But basically, we just have we have subjects come into the virtual environments, and after becoming acquainted with the environments, we have objects from a predetermined list render in front of them for 30 seconds. And they're allowed to move about the environment and click on the item and place it in the environment and view it in its place position until it disappears and the next item renders in front of them. So they kind of have this virtual briefcase. And they go around and they place the items in the environment and then go on to the next environment and the next environment.
The sequence is predetermined, but the location where they place it, it's up to them.
Totally of their own volition. That's one group of subjects that we're telling to employ this strategy of clicking and placing. The other subjects are doing everything almost exactly the same, except we're not instructing them to click the item and place it, right? They're just viewing the items as they walk around the environment. Because we have the hypothesis that, since our brains are so good at spatial memory, that when we explicitly take items and, we're trying to form a memory that's not inherently spatial, but we're binding those items to a spatial environment, we're able to recruit this strong scaffolding that we have for spatial processing and use it for the memorization of non-spatial things. So that's where our 2 groups kind of are. And right now we're seeing very, very strong effects in the group that's actually placing the items versus the group that's just walking around while viewing the items. And of course, now we're bringing that up a level, and we're going to, use fMRI to scan people during their recall of these items and see what's different about the fact that they encoded this information using a spatial strategy versus not a spatial strategy.
Through the agency that I have to determine the spatial location of this item, I have a stronger connection in my memory. And the fMRI scan, so you're scanning the brain to find out if that hypothesis is true.
Correct, yeah. So we're going to compare brains of people who had encoded it in this spatial fashion and people who had done it in just the active learning, walking around virtual fashion, and see what are, obviously there's a clear behavioral difference, right? These subjects are remembering almost double the amount of information. They're remembering it all in order, not just what items were on the list, and they're making longer streaks before even making an error. So clearly there's a behavioral difference. And, since we've operationalized this concept of separating people into high memory retrieval and low memory retrieval, we want to identify what are the neural mechanisms making that possible. Like if there's such a strong behavioral effect, there really should be a neural component to it.
What are you looking for when you look at the resulting images that you're scanning?
The scanner's not just taking one picture, but instead taking one picture every second, right? So we can look at the differences in the pictures at each time point in that time series of pictures that we have and look at local fluctuations, due thankfully to some serendipitous physics that occur with blood flow, infer that, certain subpopulations of neurons in the brain are recruiting blood, and that kind of changes the way the picture looks. So we look at that across time and say, okay, so here's someone's brain for these 30 seconds while they're recalling information that they had learned the day before in the scanner. And we're essentially looking at distributed patterns of that brain activity across time to see what is the spatiotemporal pattern that's responsible for this enhanced recall. So what does your brain look across this time period when you encoded information spatially and are now recalling it versus someone who is now recalling information that was encoded in a non-inherently spatial fashion and doesn't have that mnemonic benefit. So we're doing some things that are called like functional connectivity, and then we're also doing a lot of machine learning so that we can look at a brain's time course and say, hey, is this from someone who encoded information using the method of loci or using just the active learning strategy? And then basically we can narrow in on which portions of the brain provide us with enough information to correctly say, oh, this is this type of person's brain or this is this type of person's brain. So then it's a very informationally based approach. And then we can say, okay, this region and this region are both have enough information. So they must be doing something maximally different across these two subjects. And then those are kind of the regions where we'd want to focus on and say, okay, there's something about this region that's giving these people this mnemonic enhancement.
I've interviewed so many educators about their experience in Second Life with really various different groups of learners, kids, adults, and so on and so forth. And they all say, most of them just sort of intuitively and then anecdotally say, the retention in these virtual worlds is so immensely improved because we're talking about something and we're sitting in a volcano, let's say, and then I can make the volcano explode and everybody remembers quite complex information, and they always kind of tie it back into this experience when they were with 10 or 20 other learners in that virtual volcano. I mean, is that something that you've been looking at also, just by nature of sort of a virtual environment, that is already an improvement in retention to regardless of everything else?
Certainly, yeah. So that's going to actually be one of our future conditions, which is, we're going to have people do the classic implementation of it. So imagining, a very dull environment or just another household environment. We have like really stripped down versions of the environments called red, green, and blue world, where it's just a giant red cube, and you walk around and place things in the environment. Because early research, dating even back to the 70s, showed that when using this method of loci strategy, the more fantastical you could get with things. So, I gave you the example of, walking in and placing a banana next to the door in the house. But if instead you're taking that banana and like smearing it all over the door, like you're more likely to remember that because you're conjuring up a more vivid instance. So, virtual reality lends itself to that much more easily. Like it's much more easily for, like you said, to remember a volcano exploding if you're actually receiving, visual input.
Nico, can you also mention while you're talking about that it seemed like people who are in the VR are recalling more words than previous research using very similar material has shown?
Yeah. I mean, I hesitate to make that claim because it's obviously like different studies and stuff. But the other things that have tried to do stuff like this have not had as strong of an effect as we are seeing.
I'm talking about the method of loci. I'm talking about the Swahili words. Remember how I did that comparison with the Orson and Carpenter study?
Yeah, you should speak on that because I'm not.
Okay.
I don't know enough.
We'll get to that. That's great. What comes to mind, and we talk about this on the podcast also, you touched on it, the interesting thing is that there seems to be a disconnect still in sort of the real world of teaching, a kind of a really butting heads, and I'm in this as a father as well. When I talk to teachers about sort of what I do, and then 50 or more than 50% roll their eyes and say, "Oh my God, that's that doesn't work." In the teaching context, while there is so much evidence, as you just said, that the brain just makes those connections when you have a creative environment or a fantastical environment, and the retention is improved. But there's a huge sort of let's just call it old school way of teaching where it's sit down, head down over a book, and I have absolutely nothing against books. But what does it take? I mean, you guys are there on the forefront studying this stuff and hopefully making your way and changing this maybe in the real world. Then what is your sense of this, the potential that you have there if you can actually prove all these things?
It's a great question. I mean, and I think that a lot of it has to do with the way that academia views funding for certain research. So, a lot of our research is, may receive additional support because, if we can help facilitate someone's memory, then that's really good for someone with Alzheimer's. Like we're able to bring them back to baseline. So it's kind of like it has this emphasis on repair first, like of repairing our population, and then of course using the same tools to enhance our population, which is kind of, that's kind of like what I think is my manifesto, if you will, is to like kind of identify, understand ourselves and kind of hack ourselves in a way that we can enhance our experiences. And I think that, we're getting there. All significant change is generally slow. Even it took general relativity like even a couple decades to really permeate in the physics world. So,
Joey, let's bring you in here, and then we'll go back and forth. So, Joe, you work on some other things.
Actually, I want to make a quick comment on the educational front. So one of the things that we know from animal research is that when you explore a new environment, your brain releases something called dopamine, which helps you learn. So one of the reasons probably behind the increased memory in some of the anecdotal evidence in life could be that people, after exploring that volcano, the fact that they had explored the volcano helped them learn in addition to the environment being novel itself.
Mm-hmm. It was breaking up a little bit, but I understood it. So the dopamine production, the fun of things, let's say, is just a joyful experience that then connects these kind of complex things that you learn in this environment.
Dopamine itself helps you remember better something that you learn immediately after the dopamine release after you sleep. So you release dopamine, you learn something new, you go to bed, you wake up, you remember it better. than if you had not had that dopamine release.
But the dopamine is released during the activity.
During the exploration of a novel environment.
So, Joey, please tell me, me who understands very little of almost everything. So what are you working on? Give us the scoop.
My study is kind of similar to Nicos' study in the sense that we study memory. Now, what my goal is to see if we can use some more classical techniques, so older than what we do today, but not as old as Nicos' technique, method of loci. So something around the 30s to the 70s, where they found that context, as in the environment in which you learn something, is very important to recall. So again, going back to what Nicos said earlier about the spatial memory, humans are very good at spatial navigation, and the memory for spatial environment is very astonishingly good. Now, what I do is I wanted people to bind very similar material to two different environments. So we're teaching our participant two Bantu languages. So that's Swahili and Chinyanja, and then we teach them in two different environments. So one is kind of like a fantasy land, one is kind of like a sci-fi land.
And again, this is in OpenSim. So you created these environments in OpenSim, and that's where the learning happens.
Yes. So in OpenSim, we have a sci-fi environment and a fantasy environment. So we will teach people in two different environments, two different languages. And then later, when they recall, we'll have them first imagine themselves in the room in which they learn that word. So let's say you learn cat in Swahili, and then when you are in the fMRI scanner or when you just come back to the lab the next day, I'll say, okay, now imagine yourself in that room in say, the sci-fi world, and let's say the climate control room. That's where you learn the cat word. Now, I'm going to ask you to imagine yourself back in that room, look around, and remember how it feels like. And then I'll ask you to recall the word of cat in Swahili. And then I will compare that to when I ask you to imagine the fantasy world bar. And then now we call the word of cat in Swahili. So one environment, you learn the word cat, another you didn't. And then I'll compare how well you recall. Obviously, I wouldn't use the same word, but in the two condition. For half of our people, we have them learn two languages in two different environments. So the first comparison will be words that you recall after you remember the environment that you learned the word, and compared to words that you recall after we ask you to imagine another environment. So the second comparison is that we're going to have two groups of subjects. One group will learn two languages in two worlds like we talked about. And in the second group, we'll have them learn everything in the same world, but in different rooms for the same words. And then we'll compare how well the second group, how much worse the second group will be compared to the first group. Does that make sense? So you kind of the second condition where you learn everything in the same world will be similar to a university student going to every single classroom. Going to one classroom, one of those large lecture halls, and then you learn math and then you learn English. Or like a high school student, right? You're in the homeroom for all kind of classes. How would not learning everything in the same room help you remember things better? Is kind of the goal in the second comparison.
This is amazing. So do you have a hypothesis? Because I do have one. It's better that you separate these subjects into two different environments.
Exactly. That's exactly my hypothesis for the second comparison. The first comparison hypothesis is that you would recall better the more able you are to kind of mentally visualize the environment in which you learn that word. This is kind of what we found so far, but overall, before the effects even emerge, we realized that people are actually recalling. So these people learn 80 foreign words, and they all sound about the same.
I was just going to say, you're not making it easy with Swahili.
Yeah, and Chinyanja sound exactly like Swahili, except so we're teaching them 80 words, 40 in Swahili, 40 in Chinyanja, and 30 out of each of these 40 words are overlapping. So you learn cat in Swahili and Chinyanja. So that's where we want to tease apart the how does the context, so the environment, how does the environment help you separate the overlapping representation? Because it's really hard. So, and what's really cool is that people remembering somewhere around, well, I want to say 50 to 80% after a week. So they go in, they see the word 4 times. They only learn each word 4 times. A week later, they remember 60 to 80%.
How does this work operationally? If you can give me some numbers of the participants, and then when you teach, and that goes for both of you, how many people are involved in this research?
I think my first study, which I actually didn't describe, but my first study, we have about 45 people, and my second one right now, we're at about 18 participants. What about Nicos?
Let's see. We had almost 50 participants, and they all come in and they're in a controlled environment.
The reason I decided to go for OpenSim instead of Second Life is so that I can export the whole thing into something called OAR, and then people can literally just import that into their own OpenSim server so that they would have exactly what we have if they want to replicate the experiment with like someone from a different culture, or if they want to do that with children, so they can just take a laptop, set up OpenSim server, or even a thumb drive, and then just import our world, and then they can redo the experiment with their own group. So that's one of the reasons why OpenSim is so awesome, that you don't even need the internet to run it.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I'm not, I might be perceived as a Second Life propaganda minister. I'm not. I'm just in love with the creativity that it sort of spawns. I mean, that's kind of the main point. But OpenSim by extension, and I understand it's also obviously a lot cheaper. And that's you can't beat that. I was wondering with the avatars, both of you guys, because people who participate in this, what is your experience with them? Do they have issues with interacting via the avatar, or is that just something that comes fairly normal to them? The reason I'm asking is that I run into this sometimes when I talk about Second Life, and there are a group of people who have real issues with sort of this avatar proxy. They really can't get into it.
So most of our subjects are university students, and one of the funny thing about what's happening with my study is that most psychology research get way too many female participants as compared to male, and mine is 80% male because they like video. So it's kind of like a self-screening audience. We are thinking about balancing that with other ways, but anyway, so most of our students have been fine with just using the avatar. And in my first study, actually, what we did is we have them customize the avatar to look like them. And then on our second one, we realized that it might actually be more better controlled if we just have them use the first person perspective.
We only do it as a male and female customization, but they're first person the whole time. So they only ever see the third person avatar when they need to like zoom out to kind of teleport to the different worlds. So yeah, I mean, and most of them are pretty intuitive using the like right hand on the mouse and left hand on like AWSD or the arrow pad.
I can see interesting studies when people would be allowed to customize their avatars in those environments.
Well, one time I had a participant being a pizza, which blocked most of the screen. Like, you need the screen. Don't block the screen with your head. We removed those giant avatars after that.
Generally, immersion, which could be facilitated by you creating an avatar in either your image and likeness or, of some fantasy of yours, might increase immersion, which I do think would help facilitate the effects, much in the same way that either like the Omni treadmill or, the Oculus Rift might be able to, it's kind of getting at the same point, which is like, how much do I feel like this is me? And then furthermore, like, if you're actually moving about the environment, then you're actually recruiting neural ensembles that are necessary for spatial navigation. So maybe your whole suite of spatial processing neurons will come online and thus maybe even further facilitate encoding.
Well, my scientific research as a virtual world journalist leads me to believe my very accurate research with my very subjective storytelling leads me. No, but I'm serious. Everybody I talk to, they say, the avatar is me. I mean, I'm talking about people who are very sort of immersed in Second Life culture and subcultures. They don't talk about their avatar as a separate entity. It's really them. It's their inner sort of their version of themselves who they want to be, and this might be an idealized version, some reflection of sort of popular culture in a way, but sometimes it really isn't. Sometimes it's something that is sort of very deep inside, and that's what helps them with the immersion. And the interesting thing is that a lot of them say that now with the advent of goggles and stuff, they're not really that excited about the goggles, interestingly enough. Again, I mean, this is very anecdotal, just a conversation that I have, because they already have that immersion going on through the investment into their avatar, which is almost kind of the same for them, right? So the goggles might go, it might be cool. Maybe I'll pick up some goggles at some point, but they all say I don't really need them. Now let's go to the Oculus though, because you have one now, Nico, or I don't know what the access is that you have. What are your findings now with an Oculus? How does that change things? How also in terms of, take it where you will, also in terms of projecting into the future, the possibility of further studies in virtual reality?
Yeah, so at least for my study right now, we've kind of tabled the Oculus, mainly because it's hard for us to schedule someone who's going to come in for 2 days, and then we have to book the scanner, which if we cancel it within 24 hours, we get charged for the whole thing. And then, so we don't, the evidence is inconclusive. However, I do feel as though once we get to a point where, there's absolutely no latency in the turning of the head and the update of the retina, and when we add in, things like the Omni treadmill, like actually, getting your metabolic heart rate up a little bit, moving, actually taking steps and using your motor system, I think that people's memories, at least at the capacity at which we're testing them, will C-link. They're already almost there. And I think if we add those little things, what we're trying to do is no easy task. They're remembering 3 different lists of 15 items each. And the subjects in the method of loci group are remembering almost all of the items in the correct order. So it's pretty fascinating that you can remember 45 items in a row and, not really remember what you ate for dinner last night. So I do think that adding in things like the Oculus and the treadmill, and other, even moving into the augmented reality side of things. I'm working on another project that's doing augmented reality. I really do think that will make people in this test perfect. I think it'll really enhance it. Yeah,
we can maybe make them do like 4 lists instead of 3.
Yeah.
But what you're hinting at, I mean, this is what we hear all the time right now. The technology is such that I think you said it earlier. Motion sickness is pretty prevalent, and if you don't get the frame rates, then one little thing throws you out of the immersion.
Well, the second generation of Oculus developers kit were a lot better than the first in terms of motion sickness, but it's still just not good enough for us to risk losing $600 every other day. So, but we are there is one side experiment that we are doing that are using the DK1, the original Oculus Rift, where people are learning how to balance in OpenSim environment as well. And that one, they have less moving around to do. They're just looking at a room, walking forward. So that one we have been doing well. So far, nobody has thrown up yet.
What's the purpose of that study? Is to find out when people throw up or when?
So we did that study. We did a study, how long does it take for people to get motion sick with the DK2? So we actually did that, but that wasn't the original goal of the study. So we find out that people can generally, with the DK2, they can generally go for about 40 minutes if they play video game regularly.
I mean, it's an absolutely exciting times. I mean, you guys are I mean, I want to go back to school. I want to go to UCLA right now. I mean, I'm really envious. No, I mean, you have these tools also, the availability of the scanning coupled with the availability of virtual reality and all that is just an amazing time to do this type of research for sure.
I actually have a really good friend who is a educator, and well, she's kind of like an educator for teachers. And we actually had a talk about this because I was frustrated that all these memory techniques that was developed in the 70s or the 30s even was not used in school. I was so frustrated when I found out that all the students in America, or the high school student or middle school students, still learn everything in the same classroom. Like, that is not going to work. So she and I talked about it, and she told me generally because of policies and politics, it takes about 10 years for anything good to be implemented. But I'm telling you something depressing. My mother was a teacher in the 60s, and they were studying, and there was a lot of pedagogical things were happening, really interesting things. Something that a German teacher developed called Situationsansatz, which is basically when you have sort of your curriculum, but the child comes in with something that happened in the child's environment, then you have to kind of tailor the goal of that curriculum to the story that the child brings you. You kind of morph it back to that. So that stuff is being used in sort of quote unquote alternative school system, like maybe Montessori, a little bit more Waldorf, but generally speaking, it's not implemented, and that is like really frustrating because that stuff really does work, and it seems like you were saying. I mean, there's policy, there's sort of efficiency, and we still sit kids down in sort of these nondescript rooms. We put some posters up, and there's a world map over there, right? Yeah, the gerbil in the corner.
Yeah. Then here's a couple of iPads because we're technology. Look, we got 5 iPads, we got 10 over here, and then.
Well, and also one of the things that I always say when we talk about Nicos study is that everybody knows that memory palace work. Nobody does it. Exactly. So hopefully with Nicos set up, we can push it out to the world so everybody experience how well they could remember with this technique, and they would actually use it and enhance their own memory.
So that was Joey Esoi, and still I apologize if I butcher a name, and Nico Regente. There you have it. The Memory Palace, the method of loci is something that you can start with in real life, in Second Life, or in OpenSim. I found a really great video that actually explains that. We'll link to it, and there's tons of links and images from their OpenSim project on our blog. The OpenSim environments, by the way, have been built by Job Forder, good friend. I do hope to get a tour in OpenSim someday, and maybe I'll stream that and put it up. That's it for the show today. Let me encourage folks to watch and comment and share with the outside world my latest Drax files is number 36 about Sominel Edelman, another Dutch person. Joe, I don't know. I mean, it really seems like Second Life is run by Dutch people.
We're trying our second go at taking over the world.
Also, I really don't read New World tropes much. I have to admit, I look at it sometimes, what our tabloid colleague, Mr. Au, does. But it was interesting, and I'm going to link to it. I know this is a first. But there are some quotes from Oculus founder Pamalaki and Chief Technology Officer John Carmack basically saying, I'm kind of summarizing this, that virtual reality is awesome because technology solves every problem in the world and everybody wants to live in Malibu.
Wow.
And I find that incredibly reductive, don't you?
To me, that sounds like the worst place on earth to live, besides Syria, perhaps. It's so hot.
Sorry, there's a level of ignorance there that... let's be honest, I'm not really surprised if you grow up in Orange County and this is your whole world. I've been to Orange County many times. then it's not surprising if you're not really actively sort of thinking beyond what is offered there in terms of franchise restaurants and freeways and the beach.
Yeah, it's quite simplistic, but of course the idea is that everyone wants to have a happy life. And
but to equate that happiness with sort of, zoning out in Malibu, I mean, this is just really arrogant, I think.
Well, my Malibu is a castle in the Scottish Highland. I mean, with lots of rain and storm and things like that. So we all have our own Malibu.
Anyway, as we close the show, we remember two folks that passed away. Many creative people have passed away already in 2016. Two people that are known in the Second Life community. Tony Dyson, creator of R2-D2 and Star Wars, and prolific special effects guy. Big SL fan. Linking to an article that in our payroll and a bunch of videos of his. Great guy. But also Latif Khalifa, the man behind the Radegast viewer. Stripped down text Second Life viewer that is used by a lot of blind folks. I'm working on a story of a blind DJ in Second Life right now. She uses Radegast. It's absolutely fascinating. Latif Khalifa passed away. So yeah, that's just what happens in life.
Yeah, only 46 years old.
46 years old, unbelievable. Well, Joe, what are you up to? Anything that lifts the spirits a little bit over the weekend?
Well, I'm going to the BPA, that educational thing that we talked about, and I'm going to have a good look around, and I'm pretty sure that's going to do quite some good for the spirits.
Yeah.
And if not, I'm just going to drink a lot of spirit.
Spirit is always good for the spirit. We go out today, as I said earlier, with Starraven SAT from InSilico, with her story about what happened when InSilico went offline in the most dystopian manner imaginable. Interestingly enough, InSilico deals with dystopian roleplay in a dystopian future. So it's only fitting that the switch is being switched off in a dystopian manner. Isn't life grand? Anyway, they're also doing a fundraiser, as she mentions, and we're linking to that to the blog on the blog post. Have a fab weekend, everyone, and goodbye, Joe.
Auf Wiedersehen.
My name in Second Life is Starraven SAT, and I do public relations for InSilico. As you know, last week our sim owner, Skill's Hack, was temporarily banned from Second Life, and InSilico was shut down, with us still on it, for almost 24 hours. Not a few days, just to clarify from last week's radio hour. Honestly, it felt like days, in between dealing with multiple questions from all platforms, and still, I've got no answers. Then just as suddenly as it came, our sim owner and InSilico were reinstated. The InSilico community was shocked, for the Sims were shut down as it was active with role players, renters, and builders still on the Sims as it was suddenly closed. They were very supportive of us and filed reports with Linden Lab. We cyberpunks are a resilient bunch and very forward-thinking. I told them to stay calm, for escalating with harsh words does not help any situation. The Second Life community was also very supportive on multiple platforms, and I am very grateful for that. After the storm that was last week, this may have taken a bit of a toll on InSilico though. Paying for 4 Sims is expensive, and this made it harder. So we're holding a fundraiser to help keep all 4 regions up. People can donate to our Sims at our donation terminals located throughout InSilico. If a person donates a certain amount, they can win some cool prizes, like a month's free rent or anything from our official Sims store. So far, again, everyone has been very supportive, and it really does bring a sense of community that transcends borders. Thank you again for having me, Drax and Joe. I hope this all works out in the end.
The Drax Files Radio Hour with Joe Yardley is a weekly production of Basic Drax Entertainment. The show is supported by Hextraordinary Fine Magical Goods, Ionic, Maven Homes, Giza Creations, Botanical, Strawberry Sing, Humanoid Animations, Abranimations, Eros Avatars, Carvel Design, The Cube Republic, The Avazines Publication Family, What Next, Dutchy Furniture, Landscapes Unlimited, Bay Cities You Know for Kids, Dwarfins, Fallen Gods Incorporated, Feroce SL, and Death Row Designs. Contact the show via Skype, Drax Files, Avatar, Drax Files, or email radio@draxfiles.com.